On May 2nd, get ready to escape. ISIS escaped from Transylvania. The goddess next door and John Haynes must escape a horde of vampires on the hunt in this horror-filled ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Escape from Transylvania in paperback and e-readers May 2nd. On the first day of Bill Cosby's sexual assault retrial, a black woman decided to dart out of the bushes topless with feminist slogans painted all over her body and the names of many of Mr. Cosby's alleged victims written all over her body. And this black female is Nicole Leach, a 39-year-old former actress who played one of Rudy Huxtable's friends, the youngest daughter on The Cosby Show. Now, when it comes down to this black female, she is being used as a pawn by these white feminists to further their political agenda. And this Nicole Leach is a member of the group Femin, a Ukrainian white feminist group who is known notoriously for making protests topless with names written all over their body and slogans written all over their body. And Nicole Leach just doesn't understand the history of feminism as I see it. Because if she understood the history of feminism, she wouldn't have darted out of those bushes topless, and she wouldn't have embarrassed herself in the way she embarrassed herself. Because when it comes down to the feminist movement is notorious for using black women as pawns in their chess game. And they're using Nicole Leach as a pawn on the chess table, and her move, she was being used to be the first person taken off the board. She was basically an expendable negress who they sent out there to go make this protest with her natural hair and this body paint on herself. And that was, again, to be the pawn that is just quickly taken off the board by the white knights of the police department and then quickly discarded. And this is what this black female just doesn't understand, again, as related to the feminist movement, because the feminist movement is all about playing chess. Anyone who understands the history of the white feminist movement from the suffrage era to the 1960s understands that they have always used black women as pawns to further their movement. Now, some of the smarter black women in history, like Sojourner Truth, quickly figured this out because they were critical thinkers and said to themselves, I'm not a woman as related to this white woman. And many black women, sadly, in the 1960s never were that deep a critical thinker to understand this, and they became pawns of the white feminist movement who used the black woman to bolster their numbers, get many pieces of legislation passed, and then decided to manipulate affirmative action so white women could move ahead in the corporate ladder ahead of the black men in their community. And then they handed a handful of crumb jobs to a few mammies and bedwenches in the community after the white women got their pick of the jobs. And black women are being used again here by these feminists in this Me Too movement. Because what is happening with this Me Too movement is that the Me Too feminists are trying to reframe their narrative and their argument around Bill Cosby in hopes to try to regroup after having their movement literally start to blow up in their face. Because the original plan by white supremacists of this whole Me Too movement was to malign the image and reputation of Bill Cosby so that blacks of future generations would not aspire to be like him. What they wanted to do was tarnish his legacy with a sexual assault conviction in the same way they tarnished Mike Tyson's reputation with a false rape conviction, as I see it, so that people would not aspire to be like Bill Cosby. Because if you present a black man as a brute, most black people will not aspire to be like that black man, no matter how much success he has in his life. And the reason why they do that is because most black people do not want to be associated with the brute caricature, a violent black man who is known for abusing black women. However, this isn't the case as related to Bill Cosby. And these allegations of sexual assault are as I see it, pretty much false. And the reason why they're false is because many of these women were complicit with Mr. Cosby. Many of these women knew Mr. Cosby was married, yet they still wanted to have sexual relations with Mr. Cosby. And they were doing this during the tail end of the Jim Crow era. So when I look at these white women who are making these allegations against Mr. Cosby, these white women could have easily gone to the police at any time regarding Bill Cosby's sexual assaults during the late 1960s and early 1970s when he was starring in I Spy and starting his comedy career. I mean, Bill Cosby was not a famous international star back then. He was just another black man. And during that time, he, like any other black man, he was literally in fear of white people having the police come to arrest them based on the word of a white female. Because back in the 1960s and before then, anything a white female said about a black man was considered the gospel truth. So these allegations that Bill Cosby sexually assaulted these women, I really don't believe them because when it comes down to the 1960s and nearly the end of the Jim Crow era, again, if a black man even looked at a white woman would have called the police on that black man, and that black man would have been carted off to jail. Then, I don't see where there's all this so-called fear regarding Bill Cosby sexually assaulting any of these women. What I see when it's related to these white women is that many of these women decided to get on the casting couch with Bill Cosby in the hopes of advancing their careers. Many of them hope to be the side piece to Bill Cosby in the hopes of having some extra money. And things didn't work out in their lives. And as they got older, many of the agents out here weren't calling these women. And now that these women are in their old age, they are looking to get access to Bill Cosby's resources. But the first thing that they need before they can get access to Bill Cosby's resources in a civil trial is they need a criminal conviction. And they need the criminal conviction in order to file the civil lawsuit against Bill Cosby because Bill Cosby has more resources than they have, and he can literally keep this trial going until he passes away and there's only his estate there. So he can go on for decades and tie these women up in court for years. But if they get a criminal conviction, they can go get a civil judgment against Bill Cosby. And white supremacy wants to get both of those things so that they can tarnish his legacy and they can take wealth away from Mr. Cosby and his family. That's what the big picture of this is all about. But you can't explain this to Nicole Leach and many of these black feminists out here because when it comes down to many of these black feminists, they would rather be pawns on the white feminist table for chess instead of seeing the game being played on them and how they're being used in the game. Because what most people don't see about the big picture as related to this Bill Cosby sexual assault trial is that this Bill Cosby sexual assault trial is not just about black men. Yes, that's a part of it. White supremacy wants to destroy the black man's image of Bill Cosby. They want to keep him tarnished so that they can say that he's a bad guy. But the bigger picture is related to these white feminists because these white feminists are playing a big chess game with this trial. Because as it relates to this Bill Cosby sexual assault trial, this Bill Cosby sexual assault trial for them is about men's rights and suppressing men's rights. Because when it comes down to the white feminist, her goal with this Bill Cosby sexual assault trial is to get that legal conviction against Mr. Cosby, and with that legal conviction, then establish legal precedent for gynocentric Jim Crow. And this is what many of these racists who are so caught up in their emotions about Bill Cosby just don't see. Many of these manginas who are a part of this trial, this DA and this judge who has his wife who's supposed to be this counselor, they don't see the big picture as related to men's rights because this Cosby conviction that they want to get is about setting a precedent in the same way that the Dred Scott case set a precedent for black people. Now, when it came down to the Dred Scott case and the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, both of these cases set the legal precedent for Jim Crow. And Jim Crow were laws in the South designed to restrict the rights of black people. Jim Crow laws were designed to prevent black people from being on equal footing as white people and to restrict their rights in the South and even in parts of the North. So when it comes down to Jim Crow's foundation was established by the Dred Scott case and the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which both established the concepts of separate but equal. And what many of these white feminists want to do with the Bill Cosby sexual assault case is establish the precedent for trying to take away men's rights. Because with this case, many of these feminists were a part of the Me Too movement. What they want to do is use the conviction against Bill Cosby as the foundation for establishing gynocentric Jim Crow on men of all races in America and establishing a gynocentric state in America where women have all the rights and men have their rights limited. Because after they get this conviction against Bill Cosby, the plan is to not only go after Bill Cosby's financial resources, but then to go after the resources of wealthy men like your Harvey Weinstein, like your Charlie Rose, like your Bill O'Reilly, like your Roger Ailes, and then after that, go after the resources of the corporations where these men worked. So these white feminists want to use this case as a way to pave the way for further lawsuits against white men. Unfortunately, many of these white racists, again, they are so caught up in their emotions regarding the many white women Bill Cosby had sex with to think about what's going to happen as related to their rights. This whole case is about restricting men's rights in America and oppressing men in America. But most of these white men, they can't see this because most of them are caught up in their emotions about all these affairs Bill Cosby had with white women. Now, when it comes down to these white women were complicit, these white women were compliant, and just like this black woman, they knew what they were doing when they went out here. But most people cannot see the game that these feminists are running on them, and they can't see how these feminists take advantage of people in situations and manipulate their emotions in the same way Carolyn Donham took advantage of her husband and her brother-in-law and sent them to go murder Emmett Till. Now, after Carolyn Donham sent those two men to go out there and murder Emmett Till, they were all in their emotions. She then, after these men got acquitted, divorced her husband and monkey branched to another man, leaving those white men to suffer in poverty while she went on to have a middle-class lifestyle. And what many of these women who are a part of this feminist movement, many of these washed-up actresses want to do is they want to go out here, get access to these men's resources through these lawsuits and these judgments, and then they want to monkey branch to the top of the tree, squeeze the last bit of juice, and then have money in their old age and their retirement, because the whole Me Too movement isn't about sexual harassment and sexual assault and preventing sexual harassment and sexual assault on the job. It is about old women trying to get resources from themselves at the expense of rich men who they were side pieces to and who they slept with on the casting couch. It's all about them getting a payday at the expense of these rich men. And what they want to do as they're getting their payday at the expense of these rich men is suppress men's rights in society and restrict men's rights in society and keep men's rights restricted in society while they continue to get access to resources at the expense of that pool of men while they live a comfortable lifestyle in their old age for years on. And they're going to try to use the position of the victim to get access to those resources, because that's what that whole stunt that Nicole Leach was participating in all about. It was all about presenting these females as victims when they were never victims at all. A victim is someone who had no choice in the matter, and these females all knew what the game was as related to Hollywood. The only reason why they were on those casting couches with Mr. Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, and many others was because they wanted to take the fast track up the Hollywood ladder. And because they wanted to take the fast track up the Hollywood ladder, they decided to go and sleep with these guys. And when they stopped getting calls for roles and stopped getting calls for opportunities and stopped getting gifts as a side piece, that's when they decided to try to change the story around and rewrite the story, making themselves out to be this victim of sexual harassment and sexual assault when they weren't victims from day one. In actuality, many of these people, they were looking to the be the side piece, and when things didn't work out, they wanted to rewrite the story. That's all a lot of these women are doing. But your Nicole Leach, again, she didn't understand this, and she still doesn't understand it because she doesn't understand how treacherous white feminists are and how white feminists don't want equality. What they want is white female supremacy, and they want to be able to use the position of the victim to get white female supremacy, where they continue to play the victim and get resources at the expense of men and keep men oppressed, continuing to pander to them as they continue to poo-poo in their victim status instead of trying to step up and be the survivors that move on with their lives, because these women don't want to be survivors, because being a survivor is all about taking responsibility. And when it comes down to feminists just don't want responsibility for anything because they like being the victim and they like bullying people and shaming people from the victim position, because the victim position is how they get their power. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct Men's Issues books like the Simp series, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.